Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on PR measurement, which is being run as part of Amex Measurement Week. This is one of, I think, 45 different events that are happening over the course of this week across 5 different continents to promote analysis best practice and to bring education on analysis to the PR and communications industry. This is also the 3rd webinar in a series run by Amex, Gorkana Group and Booz Allen Hamilton. My name's Paul Hender. I'm the head of Insight at Gorkana. With me today, Jason Kemp from Booz Allen Hamilton. Jason, you're over in the States at the moment. Can you hear us?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Jason. So we're attempting a transatlantic webinar today, but with me today here is Anil Ranchod from the Stroke Association, which is the UK's main stroke charity. A bit later, Jason's going to be highlighting the work that BAH have been doing to build a measurement framework that aligns with an organisation's purpose by focusing on KPIs that are derived from the strategic pillars of that organisation. And I'm really pleased to have cajoled Anil to come and speak to us today, as I really feel that nothing brings analysis to life like a real-world case study. Anil will be talking through how analysis was a critical part of the planning, implementation and measurement of their flagship Action on Stroke campaign. But first, I want you guys to do some work for us, and we've got a quick poll which we're going to publish now, and hopefully you'll see this in front of you now. I'd like you to take 10 seconds to fill this out, if you could do this now. My poll is, what would you see as being the biggest barriers in the adoption of a successful analysis program? I've got you 5 options. One is lack of understanding, lack of industry standards, lack of access to the right tools, lack of budget, and finally, my organisation or my client, if you're an agency, doesn't see the benefit. So I'll give you a few seconds to answer that, and we've now got some answers coming in. I can see it now, and our top vote is for lack of understanding, and our second top vote is for lack of industry standards. And I think this is very interesting because lack of understanding speaks to a need for education in the industry, but also confusion about how analysis can be done. So, my dad once said to me that measuring market communications was not rocket science. And he was particularly qualified to make this observation, since not only had he been European Vice President of Marketing for Compaq, which at the time was one of the fastest growing companies in the world, but back in the 60s, and this is him, he was a rocket scientist, having worked for NASA and a number of US universities. Now, both my dad and rather unusually my mum were both physicists, so the chances of me turning out normal were pretty slim. So it was pretty inevitable that I too would be a physicist, which is what I did at university, but then why would I then go and spend the next 20 years in PR measurement? Because I haven't come across too many people with a science or a maths background in PR. And indeed, earlier this week, as part of Measurement Week, we had a round table, and this rarity was discussed when Steve Miller from the PRCA described me as a geek who can speak. And I think it's a shame that we don't have more geeks in the industry, because what we physicists like to do is to measure things. The famous physicist Lord Kelvin said, "To measure is to know. You can only improve what you can first measure." And it seems that the PR industry is now getting this. And the good news is that over those 20 years, measurement has gone from being an obscure practice to a must-have part of the communications program. A couple of weeks ago, we ran a survey across more than 300 communications professionals, both from agencies and in-house. A massive 97% claimed to do some form of measurement, most doing it themselves, with a decent proportion using a third-party analysis supplier. But, and as Homer Simpson points out when he goes back to college to take a nuclear physics course, there is a big but, it seems that there's this huge demand for better education. 93% of PRs felt that there was not enough education on PR measurement. 68% saw the need for some form of industry standard qualification, such as CIPD, which you get in human resources. Additionally, 68% of people do not measure outcomes, And what I mean by that is the effect on the end audience as opposed to outputs, which is measuring what appeared in the media. And when we looked further, a common reason was a lack of understanding of how to measure outcomes. So it seems to be the case that although the industry gets that you should do analysis, the question is, how should you do analysis? A question that is potentially answered by this lump of metal. So you're probably asking yourselves, well, what is this? And this is a lump of platinum. It's sitting under 2 bell jars. And you might be thinking, why is that? Well, the reason is that that lump of platinum weighs a kilogram. And the reason I know it weighs a kilogram is because this is the definition of a kilogram. This is the standard unit of measurement for a kilogram, which has been kept in a laboratory since 1889 in Paris. The reason it sits under 2 jars is, as with people, it has a tendency to gain weight over time. It puts on about 1 microgram a month as the surface oxidizes. And this is a problem, because if this is the definition of a kilogram, if it gains mass, then so does a kilogram, which if you're a physicist or an engineer is a problem because it throws your measurements out. If you can't measure mass, we can't measure force and weight. We don't know if the ceiling will fall down or if satellites will come crashing down to Earth. And without force, we can't measure energy. Without energy, we can't measure power. Without power, we can't control electricity. And without electricity, this webinar wouldn't work. But hopefully we can control electricity, so we carry on. So why am I saying this? Well, an important question is, like our kilogram, is there an equivalent standard in PR measurement? So for many years, the industry looked for a standard metric, the silver bullet, if you like, the one metric you needed. Now, of course, there was a commonly used metric, which was the advertising value equivalent, or the AVE. But over time, this became increasingly discredited. To answer the need, many measurement specialists came up with their own proprietary scoring systems, and they were called things like impact scores or media influence indices, which combined the many different factors that govern the impact of media coverage into one overall number. And although this was well-intentioned, it caused 2 big problems. First, it created more confusion because there was no agreed method. And that meant that you couldn't change measurement supply without changing system, so it wasn't replicable. But arguably more problematic was that these scoring systems were not transparent. So if your media influence score dropped, say, from 850 points down to 830 points one month, you didn't know why. Where had those 20 points gone? And, well, what can I do about it? And this came to a head in 2010 at the AMEC conference in Barcelona, when there was a consensus that this silver bullet didn't actually exist. And instead, the 7 key principles were agreed, which became known as the Barcelona Principles. And it was finally agreed that AVEs were not the value of public relations, and that measurement needed to be transparent and it needed to be replicable. Best practice measurement needed both quantity, such as the overall volume of coverage or the number of people reached, but also the quality, such as how favorable was the coverage, or is it conveying the right messages. Increasingly, social media could and should be measured. And we should measure both the outputs of earned media coverage, but also the outcomes, the effect on our audience, and ultimately, business results. But what does this mean for what we can measure? Well, let's think about it. If we add quality metrics, and here are some examples, and then we add quantity metrics, and of course there's increasing plethora of social media metrics, and then many, many ways of measuring outcomes, the number of options, and not just in terms of the number of discrete metrics, but the potential combination of those metrics becomes vast. It can feel a bit like playing a game of Where's Wally? We can't see what's important, what we should be measuring, what those KPIs should be. We need help. Now, to help with this, we recommend using the first Barcelona principle, which is to tie it back to goals. For our customers, we go through a communications cascade. And this is, in order to understand the metrics, we actually turn it on its head and look for the overall purpose of the organization. And then the strategic objectives, which should cascade down into the communications objectives. And when we do this, the appropriate KPIs become much easier to identify. The question mark goes away. But I still think there's a problem. even when you have frameworks like this and Amex Valid Metrics framework, it can still feel like we've gone from one extreme to the other, from the silver bullet to where's Wally, the search for a single metric to an increasingly vast choices of metrics. So there's a question here, which is there a middle option? Is there a condensed suite of industry standard metrics? Well, let's ask the market. And when we asked this question in our survey, we got a very clear answer. The vast majority of communications professionals would welcome this. So it's up to us as a measurement industry to provide it. But what should those be? And I think the first Barcelona principle still stands. It does depend on what your goals are. When we asked about communication objectives in our survey, there were two dominant answers. One was the goal of promoting brands, brand promotion, and the second was in reputation management. So what I've got here is a suggestion of each of these two primary goals broken down into three areas. The outputs of earned media coverage, the outcomes in terms of the engagement with the audience, and then the business results. Now, if we think about it, communications is about conveying the right thing to the right audience by getting in the right channel. So let's think about brand promotion and brand marketing. If we're getting our messages to the right audience through the right influencers and media, then we're probably on the right lines. How are we using tactics, though? Are the tactics we're using to get the coverage effective, such as, say, the use of images and other content, or maybe celebrity endorsements, or the use of news research? Are we generating the right engagement through social media, and can we measure awareness through market research or driving people to a website, or maybe to look us up on Google? And finally, can we tie it back to our desired business results, which for most commercial organizations is usually sales. But if you're a not-for-profit, or maybe if you're in government, then it might be different. For reputation management, my belief is that favorability and issue tracking is probably the most important metric, as well as we've said before, understanding those influencers and channels that are getting through to our stakeholders. We can then track the reputation amongst those key stakeholder groups through forms of market research and social media tracking. And in many cases, this itself can be the ultimate business result. Although, of course, we could take it further and link it to, say, more tangible business performance, such as share price. And this is just a suggestion. Have I got it right? Probably not. Am I in the right direction, though? Probably. The industry is telling us that things are too complicated at the moment. It's our job to make it more simple. Like my dad said, measuring communications shouldn't be rocket science. So we're now going to hand across the water over the Atlantic. So I'm going to hand over to Jason from BAH. Jason is a principal at BAH. He's been with the consultancy for the last 8 years. Before BAH, Jason had a number of communications roles with Levick, Mercury Group, and Edelman. My understanding is Jason's going to expand on these concepts further, and particularly around aligning your KPIs to your strategic objectives. So Jason, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul. And hello, everyone. Hopefully I did the screen right, but and thank you, Paul, for your presentation. I think it was very powerful and speaks to a lot of the dynamics that we see quite a bit across many different industries that we support around the notion in particular of how you align brand and reputation from an analytics and measurement perspective to business outcomes. And to sort of play off that, looking at really starting, what we've seen is that when you look at business outcomes and overarching strategic objectives of corporations, and that would be also, I think, inclusive of the public sector and civil society as well. Ultimately, the end outcome is not traditionally just awareness or awareness alone. And one of the things that we've been seeing and what we've been talking to our clients about is how do you go beyond awareness to link that to any type of desired behavior change across a multitude of stakeholder groups, and then how does that align in some cases to a sort of brand score, a reputation score, and then how does that impact specific business goals and business outcomes. So what we have been looking at is when thinking about how, from a communications perspective, to get a suite of industry standard metrics. Really, we've seen, and our experience has been really working closely within the corporate communications group in most instances, but also the communications team in general, looking across sectors and really examining the overarching pillars of any particular organization's strategy. And then within that, looking at what pillars may be the most applicable in terms of where communications can have a sort of profound and deliberate impact in terms of the activities, activation, engagement that will take place. Usually, it could be all of the pillars within a strategy, but we find that there is sort of a rank order where if you think about all the different ways that you can engage stakeholders that are stakeholders of economic value to an organization and can provide a strong business benefit and outcome, they're probably an order of 1 or 2, possibly 3, depending on the size of the organization, that you can align a lot of your communications activities with. And then from there, what we've recommended, what we've seen is really focus your overarching PR efforts on those pillars. And so as you start to get down sort of this, get a little bit more granularity, starting at the top with sort of the overarching, sort of elements and pillars of corporate strategy, identifying those that have the most applicability to get support from communications efforts, initiatives, campaigns, et cetera, and then really developing deliberative, integrated plans around those. Really, from there, going and looking at how you choose and identify those KPIs for those efforts that will support those particular pillars. An important thing to remember as you start thinking about those KPIs, what we've seen from our experiences, we believe, and you see on this slide here, not the best graphic in the world, but we're a consulting firm, so bear with us. But what we believe is that in any type of operational environment, there are organizational spheres of influence, and there are external environmental factors. Both of those impact stakeholder perceptions and expectations. So what we try to do when we're looking at how you measure KPIs is think about all the different types of activities that can take place in terms of reaching consumers, customers, stakeholders, et cetera, and think about how that drives initially awareness, and then from there linking that awareness to change in particular types of perception, and then how those perceptions meet expectations of stakeholders, and then how that drives towards business outcomes. So one of the things that we've done, for example, is use some advanced analytics and data science to work with organizations, not just in communications, but looking at communications, brand marketing, strategic partnerships, all citizenship and social responsibility, and how all those touch points in an integrated way, how do you identify by specific stakeholder groups the awareness that is driven, link that to how that has changed perception, and then drive from there in terms of how that is increased or decreased either brand recognition, trust, reputation, and then how that has improved or not improved, for lack of a better term, any type of the predetermined business outcomes. So when you get to that last part is really when some of those KPIs and how you look at that comes into place. Our experience has been in the absence of sort of an industry standard. A lot of the work we've been doing lately, we've seen some customization of that piece at the end in terms from a KPI perspective, mainly because we're working really deliberately to link the communications team across all the different other channels of engagement, and then specifically see how that fits to specific parts of corporate strategy. And as everybody knows, no two strategies are the same, and strategies quite often shift. But what we found is that this framework can be particularly helpful in terms of putting sort of an analytics-driven, evidence-based conversation where previously maybe the communications representative across the table has not had all of the data and analytical firepower that he or she needed for some of the larger corporate strategic planning and resource allocation conversations. And this approach really allows us to kind of try to identify those KPIs, look for the signals in the data that tie all of the really important work that PR professionals do within an organization to those specific business outcomes, giving them just as equal footing, if not more, with all of their friends and colleagues who come to the table with much longer presentations and a lot of spreadsheets with pivot tables, et cetera. And so that's one of the things that we've been focusing quite a bit on. And I think the interesting piece, and one of the things, and I don't claim to have it completely figured out, but it's one of the things that we like to continuously challenge ourselves on, is a lot of information, a lot of data that you can collect is for the most part can be moment in time, with the exception of digital information, online media, social media. That's information that's moving every single minute and in different ways throughout the entire world. So what we've done recently is think about how do you take, if you're looking at KPIs, you're looking at all the different ways to measure, and how can you take some of these initiatives like what Paul showed when you look at your strategic objectives and then drive down those metrics. How can you power that for speed in the sense of producing visualizations that allow you to link some advanced analytics from some modeling efforts, from integrating several different types of data sources, and then linking that to information that's consistently moving out in the digital and social space. What we've seen for doing that is that if you do that the right way, and you start to kind of build this sort of ecosystem and architecture around it, you can get a little bit more directionally predictive in terms of how either trust, brand awareness, or reputation may or may not influence, may go up, may go down, and how that may influence particular types of financial indicators, either if that's share price, sales, etc. So one of the things that we've been desperately trying to continue to focus on and challenge ourselves on is really how do you advance communication, KPIs and measurements in the age of big data and rapidly moving information and that environment. So not that big data is, there's not a I think there is a unified defined term of what classifies as big data, but big data is different for any type of corporate function. And so in this instance, I think back to the snap poll or quick poll at the beginning, it's really kind of putting big data analytics and this journey that Paul mentioned within the communications community around measurement in context and figuring out how you can get that to work for any particular organization that you may be working within or working on behalf of. And that has really led us down to thinking about how do you drive a return on engagement. And I think many of you that may participate in AMAC events quite a bit have actually heard my colleague and boss, Chris Foster, speak about this quite a bit. But we've been investing significantly on a concept around return on engagement, which is looking at all the different types of engagement that you can do from a communications perspective and applying some analytic modeling algorithms, different types of data sets fully integrated, powering it with digital and social content, and thinking about and looking at how do you really get that return on engagement. So that allows you to then start rank ordering stakeholders of economic value from an organization and being able to go to have a seat at the table and say, okay, what type of impact do we want to have? Do we want to roll out these 7 initiatives and we want pure business impact? Or do we want to roll out these 7 initiatives and our goal is to have business impact, reputational impact, and perhaps, as we've seen with some of the work we've done, trying to operationalize shared value, some social impact, social benefit as well. So ROE is emerging to be really sort of a portfolio measurement and management tool, very analogous to sort of cost benefit, sabermetrics, advanced econometrics, et cetera. So things that we've seen and we've learned from working on engagements within the corporate finance division or more directly with business leaders, and trying to bring that applicability and usage into the communications and sort of stakeholder engagement space, in particular around brand and reputation. So in conclusion, before I turn it on over back to Paul or to our next presenter, really this is about alignment. And one of the things that we've learned quite a bit, and again, we're still learning every day, and I actually was rapidly taking notes when Paul was speaking earlier. The goal for us is really how do you result in meaningful measurement. And we firmly believe that as a marketing representative or a CSR representative sits at the table and thinks about their measurement, has their particular point of view, we believe in this day and age that the PR professional is doing incredibly impactful work, and our desire is to make sure that that's integrated as closely as it can be to business outcomes, so that some of the other individuals in an enterprise who may not be as familiar with the benefits of communications can be appreciative of it, and you can put it in a context driven by data and evidence so that can be a core part of any type of operationalizing any type of corporate strategy. So, you know, it's definitely not rocket science. It's a little hairy some days, but that's okay because I'm bald. So fortunately for us, we've had a lot of opportunity to do some great work on this, and I think we look forward to working within the AMEC community globally to continue to pressure test this and challenge ourselves and see how we can you know, get down a path of looking at industry standards and then the applicability of that from all of our clients, not just in the private sector, but public sector and civil society as well. So thank you. Paul, do I turn back over to you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jason. That was brilliant, and yeah, very enlightening in terms of what I probably would call a very holistic way of looking at stakeholder engagement and kind of aligning it across an organization so that it's not just a communications function. I'll come back to you later on, but because we're going to move on now to bring in Anil. We actually have had a question in, which I think tees this one up quite nicely, which is, you said that share price and sales are not useful outcome KPIs for government and not-for-profits. What would be? And I'm now going to talk to Anil about measurement of a particular campaign that they did, which is Action on Stroke Month. And I think by going through this, it will really illustrate hopefully a good answer to that individual question. So welcome, Anil.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. It would be great if you could give us maybe a bit of a background on where the idea for Action on Stroke Month came from.
Okay, thanks very much. Idea of Action on Stroke Month came about through, we looked at how the Stroke Association was operating. Now, they were doing a lot of fantastic work around the country, but it was happening in bits, and it was fragmented, the messages were mixed, and it became really difficult for our audiences to understand what we were about, what was stroke about, the way it impacted on people's lives, and that the fact that there was a life after stroke. One of the main driving forces for this was actually the Stroke Association was seen as part of the NHS, not as an independent charity that relies on public donations for its funding. It's something that we are still trying to overcome today. But Action on Stroke Month actually helped us to demonstrate, allowed us an opportunity to launch our new brand and helped us position us as a charity in need of funds, stating our beliefs, i.e. that we are here for stroke survivors and put stroke survivors at the heart of everything that we do. By creating this platform, we were able to bring the organization and stakeholders together under one banner to create a bigger impact.
Right. You've, my understanding is that this is now the third.
Yes, in
third one?
2014 we held our third one, which was in May 2014.
Okay. So if you rewind a bit and talk about the first one, yes. I presume the challenge you had was that if you hadn't run it before, how do you know what a good result would have been?
Yeah, and that was the challenge for us in setting targets that for something that we had no clue. In making our proposal and our suggestions to our director of management team and our board of trustees to run an Action on Stroke Month, we had to show evidence of the impact that it was going to have. But we had to speak in a language that they could understand. So what we did was we looked at the performance of the team over the previous 12 months, based on average, and increased it by 10%, looking at coverage. We also looked at how the impact that the month itself would have on different areas of the business. And so we looked at fundraising, how many new donors would that bring, how many new supporters. We looked at volunteers, how many new would that bring. We looked at the people that would come to the organization to support us, so in terms of new campaigners. And we looked at website hits, calls to our helpline, looked at how we would bring the stroke community together. It was difficult, I'm not going to lie, because a lot of people didn't see the benefits of this to their various areas of work. But one of the main challenges was in terms of getting that media coverage to get people talking about it. So we worked very closely with the campaigns team, the media and campaigns team together, to develop our Life After Stroke campaign, identified some strong news angles, which were developed in line with our corporate strategic goals. Which sometimes the two don't often work together. But it was an important area of work for us, and we knew that we had to set some important goals.
Yes. So I guess that leads on into how you then decided on which KPIs you were going to measure, the specific KPIs. And I alluded to earlier on about this idea about tying it back to the goals, and talked about this idea of a communications cascade. Now, we did the same exercise with you. It was good if you could sort of describe how that worked. Okay.
What we did was, building on from year one, where we looked at, working with Kokana, we looked at the evaluation of year one and looked at the organizational overall goals and set strategic corporate objectives, and then looked at our communications objectives as part of that within Action on Stroke Month. So looking at the communications cascade on the screen now, the overall purpose and vision of the Stroke Association is to prevent strokes and support people to achieve a life after stroke through providing services, campaigning, education, and research. How do we translate this into strategic objectives for the month? Well, what we wanted to, our overall purpose for the month was to raise awareness of stroke and the role of the Stroke Association, grow and engage with the stroke community, encourage people to contact the Stroke Association. The measures we used were social media interaction, recruitment. I've put the word recruitment because it includes donors, volunteers, supporters, campaigners. Look at website hits. Why is website hits? Because a lot of our information is actually available for people through the website. And also, what we found is when someone finds their loved ones having a stroke and they're sitting in a stroke unit and they're sitting in that waiting room, the first thing they do is go to find us and to find that information. So it was vital that we got more people to understand that that information was available online. We looked at measuring helpline calls. Again, a lot of people said they felt alone and isolated, and the helpline calls was increasing that number of helpline calls was crucial, so that people knew that there was other support available. And the big one for us was to look at the hard-to-reach audiences. Stroke affects Black and minority ethnic audience communities the most, and yet we found that our communications were not reaching them as much as we'd have liked to. So that became a real crucial target for us. We turned these objectives for the month into communications objectives. So we looked at, we were going to launch the mini stroke campaign for 2014. We looked at focusing on prevention messages and building awareness. And of course, secondary prevention, because a lot of people, stroke survivors have said, when they have after having their first stroke, the most worrying thing is, am I going to have another? And what I haven't had information about how I can prevent myself from having another one. So it was a crucial campaign for us. And also to promote the Stroke Association's range of support services to stroke survivors and their families and carers. And another important objective was to look at building engagement with new and previous TIA or mini-stroke survivors. Why was this important was because mini-stroke survivors haven't actually seen themselves as stroke survivors. They considered stroke to be quite different to a mini-stroke, when actually it is a warning sign of something big that's going to come. The measurables that we used was key message delivery in all our media coverage. Yes, in previous years we were proud to say we've reached over 1,000 articles, we've reached an ABE of over £1 million, and we had almost 1 billion OTF. Okay, I'm slightly exaggerating, but it might as well have been, because that actually meant nothing to our board of directors and also to our trustees. In fact, you start mentioning those numbers and you could see people's eyes glaze. So we had to talk about how many messages were delivered and to which audiences, how many times we were reaching them, were the calls to action appearing in our coverage, what was the awareness like, and how many stakeholders were engaging with us. And I use the term stakeholders because it's not just our beneficiaries, but it's also the other charities, the other supporting organizations. For instance, we had the Royal College of General Practitioners, RCGP, the Royal College of Physicians, the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists engage with us because they needed to kind of, they endorsed our campaign because they knew the importance of preventing a stroke would help their physicians. So.
Great. And you mentioned a bit around when people's eyes glazed over because you were showing them big numbers that didn't really mean a lot, and
yeah.
talking about actually much more tangible results that you can get your head around. What's the organisation's reaction been to that type of that type of measurement and the activity in general? And have there been any sort of learnings in terms of how this will go forward in the future?
Yes. If I go and look back at 2013 and how we first worked with Gorkana in developing and setting some meaningful KPIs that were much more in line with our strategic, our corporate strategy, it became crucial that we started looking at what are these measures of success. And so we started looking at things like volume and quality of coverage. When we say quality, we were getting a lot more than these mentions. Oh, it's Action on Stroke Month. But journalists were actually writing more in depth about stroke and the impact that it was having on people's lives. We found that people were interacting with the articles. We were getting people writing back to us, but also writing into the paper to say, thank you for doing this and thank you for raising awareness. So, but that wasn't being reflected in our evaluation. So we looked more at that. If I run through some of the successes that we had in 2014, we saw a 12% increase in public awareness of the Stroke Association and 10% increase in public awareness of mini stroke or TIA, thanks to a survey run by Gorkana Group for us. This showed a real success in that our coverage was actually having an impact on our target audiences. Working with the Gorkana evaluation team, we found out that we'd reached 80% of UK adults with a Action on Stroke Month message, an average of 8.8 times during the campaign, that's during the month of May. A core metric for us was the fact that we reached 74%, that's almost 3/4 of the Black and minority ethnic audiences, 8 times through PR. This was a significant increase compared to 67% being reached 7 times in 2013. Again, as I stated, a core group for us because stroke affects the BME communities much more than it does our white communities. I could go on and on about with the various metrics, but I mean overall we saw a much more valid feedback in terms of the kind of media coverage we're getting and the impact that it was having on different areas of our work, from our website through to our social media, which we saw a 96% increase interaction in May 2014 compared to the previous year. What this meant is we saw people coming to engage with the organization who had never done so. Yes, we used a lot of different tools to kind of engage with these people, but it meant that we were choosing the right and appropriate collateral to engage. So overall, we saw an increase in donations, we saw an increase in engagement with the organization, and we saw people coming in to want to support the organization. The next slide has a little bit more stats. So if you look over at the graph, I don't know if you may or may not see it on your screen, but social media mentions went up 96%, an increase on 2013. Our total website hits in May was 145,195. Again, that was the highest amount of traffic we had in the month of May and ever to our website. We had 1,742 helpline calls. That was an increase of 26% and on the year before. We had 188 new campaigners. signed up to the month, and we also saw our sign-ups rise up to 1,162. That was an increase of nearly over 500 new people signing up to the month. So we're seeing the month grow year on year, and this is in the main thanks to the PR and publicity work that we're doing, but also to the on-the-ground face-to-face activity that's going on by our support, valuable supporters of fundraisers, volunteers, and anyone connected with stroke. So,
and is this, you mentioned right at the beginning around galvanizing people, trying to create alignment.
Yeah.
How you've given me some really powerful statistics there in terms of not only the good coverage that's being generated, but what that's actually achieving in terms of awareness, in terms of driving people to the website, in terms of getting people to volunteer. Has this helped to educate people within the organisation, though, in terms of educating them on the benefits of running this campaign?
Very much so. We are, it's quite dangerous actually, because now our chief exec and our board of directors are becoming a bit more clued up, because they are understanding the value is not in OTS or AVE, but in what has been the impact. Well, we had great outcomes, and we're now looking at the impact that it's had on our work. What impact has it had on our fundraising? What impact has it had on our calls to Helpline? So it's a learning process, but it's also proved a valuable process. It's helped us to look at, in developing our next corporate strategy, informing those objectives, and also setting the next set of KPIs, so that our work is much more focused around achieving those corporate strategic goals. We're not just battling with figures, we're actually showing the impact of our work. So there's been an appreciation for where we're going in terms of our media work and our PR work, and it's helping to drive and make the case for more investment and support for the team.
Great, fantastic. But I think it's worth always bringing this back to what Stroke Association is about, isn't it? Because it's not just about numbers.
No, and that's why I'm going to end off with one final thought, just to remind us that, yeah, all those numbers mean a lot, but at the end of the day, it's this one comment that just really made Action on Stroke Month mean something for us this year. I'll read it in case it's not visible on anybody's screen. It's taken from an email to our stroke information service. On Saturday morning, I found that I couldn't use my right arm. I was a bit alarmed, but the feeling went away, and we got on with our day. On Sunday, I saw your campaign in the New Statesman and realized that what had happened might be serious. So on Monday morning, I asked for an appointment to see my GP. Within a couple of hours, she'd confirmed that she thought I'd had a mini stroke and referred me. I had masses of tests at the TIA clinic and was put onto various drugs. So I'm a bit shaken, but so very glad that I saw your advert and took action. And it did end up, thank you so very much. So this just makes it all the worthwhile. You know, if we were able to prevent one stroke, it definitely was worthwhile.
It definitely does. I think it's a kind of poignant reminder that it's, you know, what we're doing is trying to measure the effectiveness in what we do, but ultimately it is what we do that counts, regardless of the organisation. Jason, are you still there?
Yes, still here.
Great, great. Let's bring you back in then, because I actually wanted to pick up on a couple of things that you pointed out. So one of the things you were discussing was this kind of holistic way of looking at stakeholders, not just in terms of the media coverage that they're getting, but in terms of a whole array of things. But can I ask a kind of specific question on how do you understand what that stakeholder engagement or the stakeholder perception is? I mean, are you using some form of market research to do that? How are you going about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. Well, we're using market research. What we've seen is with a lot of our clients is that there's a wide range of market research going on, commissioned in some instances by different parts of an organization who weren't even aware that the other one was commissioning it. And so what we've done and what we spent sometimes with our clients is looking at all sort of a collective group of market research that's been collected around either multiple different stakeholder groups or in some instances one stakeholder group, and then really integrating all that data and bringing it together so they can kind of sort of have a picture of what this information looks like. And in some cases, you can find by mashing up different data sets, you're able to get a little bit of a longitudinal view, which in our case helps some of the predictive intelligence and predictive analytics capabilities that we deploy in the market. And then from there we overlay that with with digital and social media. And so we work hand in hand with a wide variety of digital data providers to develop particular parameters using natural language processing and other sort of web text analytics to take the information from the research and help it sort of come alive and sort of be able to look at, based on that research in terms of understanding stakeholder perceptions, how can you use that information to then see how those perceptions may be shifting one way or the other in almost a real-time manner based on refreshed, constant moving digital content. So what we've been trying to do is take market research and drive more value from that data by applying some data science and data integration techniques to it, and then linking it to information that is moving consistently and changing on any given day, and then segment that by specific stakeholder groups. So as an example, as you start to do that and get an understanding for the landscape, you can see where any type of particular communication strategy may have had an impact on trust, reputation, or brand awareness, and you can kind of control for that from a variability perspective by building things in the model through open source data. Like in the United States, for example, every single week there's a consumer sentiment is done by our Department of Labor. So you can take that open source data, other open source data from either government or NGO, such as Pew, some organizations, the University of Chicago. And you can use that to kind of make sure that you're controlling for the external environment and really drive to some granularity to see, okay, well, we spent this much money on marketing, you had this communications campaign going on. These are some of the baseline understanding levels of stakeholder expectations around these topics, and this is how, sort of the digital landscape reacted to that type of intervention or engagement, and then this is what we believe the outcome was on, trust, brand awareness, reputation, and then we believe that this will have this aligns to this type of business outcome. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's very helpful. I've actually got a kind of follow-on question here from our audience. I'm interested to know how you measured awareness. And I think this comes back to Anil on the Stroke Association, but it's linked to this whole kind of understanding stakeholders. I'm interested to know how you measured awareness, as this always seems to be the expensive bit, i.e. commissioning surveys. And this is certainly, from my experience in the past, I've evangelized about how important it is to understand how people, the outtake, but how people are taking or perceiving the media coverage. And of course, what comes back is I can't afford to do that because surveys cost lots of money. Yeah. But we're increasingly, Jason's mentioned a few techniques that you can use that you don't necessarily require the kind of traditional forms of market research. Yeah. But also, we're finding there are increasing techniques, web-based techniques, that allow you to do research in a much cheaper way. I think we did that with you guys on the
exactly.
Association.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we ran a pre and post survey through Gokana, which was very cheap, and it was cost effective, and it provided valuable insight into terms of where our media work was going. The importance of that was we were able to go back to our board and say, this is the impact we're having. We saw an increase of 18% awareness of the Stroke Association. It's great, but as with all media activity or all marketing activity, it's got to be sustained, otherwise it's going to peter out. Which gave us the justification to go back and say we need to do something in the autumn. And can we have the budget to be able to do so to maintain that level of awareness of the Stroke Association? Yeah.
We're actually getting quite a few questions here about budget, which I think is kind of ironic, because when we ran the poll earlier on, lack of budget actually was one of the weakest answers. Ironic that we're now getting questions through about it. But one, I guess, question is around budget is Action on Stroke Month is a campaign.
Yes. Action on Stroke Month is an activity, and we launch a campaign in that.
Sorry, yeah. thanks for correcting me. You're absolutely right. But are you doing anything on an ongoing basis in addition to measuring action on stroke month itself?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we look at, well, we measure all our coverage throughout the year through Gokana, and we evaluate on a quarterly basis. It provides us valuable insight into which audiences we're reaching, how many times, and also what are people's understanding of our business, and it relates that to our corporate strategic goals, which is crucial in feeding back to your board on terms of what value for money we're getting.
Great, thank you. A very interesting question here. Jason, I think this is one for you.
Sure.
Which is around, it says here, what new metrics are emerging this year, but I'm going to expand it further and say, well, what trends are we seeing emerging at the moment? And maybe to tee you up, I think one of the things you've alluded to, and certainly one of the things I'm seeing, is this greater appetite for looking at different data sources across an organization. This whole, almost like this, there's a big data meme, I like to think about it, where you have data sources about customers, you have data sources about social media, you have data sources about earned media coverage, you have data sources around sales data, and increasingly I think organizations are more open to looking at these data sources together and trying to understand what this means and gaining intelligence from it. It'd be good if you could perhaps comment further, because you obviously mentioned this earlier on.
Sure, no, happy to. I mean, I think, you know, my point of view on that is there hasn't been a sort of a new unified metric that has emerged yet, like a net promoter score or any type of, you know, reputation index or any sort of, you know, potential to be sort of an industry standard or used in a sort of lexicon at an industry-wide level. That being said, I think we are at a point and a moment in time, because of big data, that does not mean that we shouldn't be thinking differently and challenging ourselves as a community to think about what, you know, what new specific metrics could emerge. And, you know, what I've seen is oftentimes, you know, some of the best thinking is when you have you know, communicators from an enterprise and they start to engage in dialogue across different corporate functions, and they start to get you know, sort of different data sets, and you merge and you integrate those data sets and think about the, you know, not the sort of, you know, terabyte or megabyte size of the data, but it's the value through the data and what the implications on that can mean across the whole entire engagement or communications life cycle. So I think, you know, from that point of view, it provides an opportunity in a moment in time, I think, to come together and look at what new metrics could emerge. I will say one thing that I have seen, and, you know, Booz Allen has seen with a lot of our clients recently, is looking at the customer journey and the customer experience, but not just in the lens of traditional marketing. It almost kind of plays off some of the thinking of sort of design thinking that, you know, there's some boutique firms that kind of specialize in that. But it's looking at the journey that a particular customer, a particular stakeholder goes on in terms of its interaction with an organization and public sector, private sector, civil society, and looking at all those various different types of touch points, and almost taking you know, a combination of a quantitative, qualitative approach to identify sort of what, you know, what sort of in metric can allow you to discern, you know, how was that customer experience, how was that customer journey, and along that journey, communications can play a very critical role in influencing that in a net positive way, or, you know, the absence of it influencing it in a net negative way. So that's been some of the things that, you know, we've been kind of noodling in our mind, is how do we take some of this design thinking, which sort of merges, you know, ethnographic and anthropologic research, and marry that to some of the more big data, pure quantitative pieces, and take some of the lessons learned through some of the customer experience work that's been more traditionally done in sort of the marketing function, and maybe look at that holistically across all types of different ways to engage stakeholders, inclusive of communications teams. Does that help, Paul?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I think it's a very interesting time at the moment in terms of how the whole you know, the whole world of analytics is moving on. I think from, if you're a small to medium-sized enterprise and you're starting measurement and you've never done it before, to a big organization and you're thinking about how you've got all these different data sets and you want to know how to make the best, get the best insight from it. Yeah, it's a very interesting time. I'm going to bring this to a close now. So I just want to say a big thank you now to Jason. Thank you very much. Also to Anil, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will be sending the slides and the audio out tomorrow to everyone that's subscribed to this. Hang on, so Anil's just asking me a question.
I just wanted to just leave everyone with one thought, that think about what you want to achieve. Measurement has never been so important as it is in this current economic environment. As a charity, we are funded by voluntary donations, and being accountable, setting KPIs, meaningful KPIs that makes us accountable for every pound that we spend, because every pound that we spend can be saving a life, and we show that the difference that we're making to achieving that corporate goal.
Exactly, and how that's, again, tying this measurement back to what we're actually trying to do in the first place. My final thought is that as part of Measurement Week, apparently Francis Maude, who's the Minister for the Cabinet Office, has come out publicly and said he's praised Measurement Week as saying it's a great way to exchange thinking and ideas. So I'm proud to be part of Measurement Week, and I'm really appreciative of everyone that's put effort into making these 45 events a success. We're still some way to go, so I'm hoping that you all continue to listen into events over the next few days. And I want to thank you all for participating and for listening, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.